I would like to hand the stage over to Kevin. Oh, there you are. Fantastic.
Hi.
Kevin's the CTO of Conjur. He has over 15 years of technical experience, and he's going to talk to us about security as a user experience. So thank you. Give it up for him, please.
With me here is Jody Hunt. Jody is, how would you describe yourself? Technical sales, field?
Yeah, jack of all trades. I do a lot of stuff with customers and helping them out, so.
It was a lot more fun to make this presentation with someone else than all by myself, so Jody and I did it. Dustin Collins also helped us out. You may know. He's a shady flower. Are we gonna like feedback into each other?
No, I don't think so.
You guys would be able to talk.
Okay, I think so. I like rock and roll.
So how many people here have a positive experience with security?
Yeah.
So notice we didn't qualify. We said it's a user experience, but we didn't say what kind of user experience. So that's kind of what we want to talk about, is how do we turn this from a maybe not so positive perception, and I think some of it is a perception, to a truly positive user experience. So this is going to be born of a lot of lessons learned, mostly from Kevin.
Mostly from our customers.
Mostly from Kevin's experience with our customers and Dustin and Jason. So these are two of our colleagues, Dustin Collins and Jason. I think we may have already introduced them. So we're going to, what does this mean as a user experience? How do we make it more positive? How do we, and what does it mean for the different phases of the CI/CD tool chain? We've got some recommendations, so hopefully some things that you can take away, and then just some things that we've learned along the way, as Kevin said, from our customers and from some of our own experiences. So first off, the experience of development. You are software users, right? Your experience in developing software is a user experience, and things that get in the way of that, are impediments to your experience, and sometimes security is perceived that way. So the quality of your experience not only affects your day-to-day happiness, but it can affect the productivity of your teams. And too often security is seen as the thing that gets a lot of attention in and of itself for the ends, but the means are often negative. And so what we wanted to focus on was, how do you improve the user experience of security? That's really what we wanted to talk about.
That's probably the thing that's changed the most about our company over the last 3 years, is starting out as kind of the biscuit wafer thing, an MVP, hooray, to actually no, really this needs to be an experience that developers, security people, and operations can all really enjoy and feel good about. And I think that's the same thing as any other product. The bar, there's a feeling, at least in our company, and I'm sure in the wider world, that the MVP is not the bar anymore. It's not sufficient. You have to have an experience that people like, and that's not any different for us than for anybody else.
So principles of a good security experience. These are just some things that when we were putting this together. So what makes a good user experience with security? Security by default, where you're not really thinking about it, where it's transparent, where it's just kind of the way that you do things, but it's not something that's an overt thing. I'll say, I have to go do this to comply with our security policies. It's something that just happens, and this is kind of in line with general DevOps principles. Make the right behavior the easy behavior, and so that's really all we're saying here. Of course, you need to satisfy the audit and compliance folks without too much headache. So it should be easy that as an artifact of doing your job, the correct metrics are being collected, and those can then be fed to the folks that really care about that, and you can get on about your work. So that's just some general principles that we think. We'll get into some of the workflow stuff here, but the 3 recommendations that we're going to dive into are: first, separation of concerns based on environment. So the security concerns of a dev environment should probably be pretty different from those in prod. I think that's pretty obvious. But even your CI environment and your testing environments have different security profiles, so you shouldn't have the same onerous kind of security protocols that you might need for prod in development. And maybe that's obvious, but we'll dive into some of the issues there. Second is mapping the workflows and the roles. So if you haven't already documented your workflow and the roles and the various participants, that's a great place to start. Maybe you want to do your value stream mapping at the same time, so you can start identifying inefficiencies in your flow and everything like that. But documenting the workflow and documenting the roles, and then figuring out who needs access to what and who doesn't or shouldn't have access to what, is a big part of that. And then third, that feeds into the definition of your policies. So you want to manage your policies as code, and we'll talk about what we mean by policies, because it's not always a document, you know, a big thick document or something like that. So
yeah, I think just we're going to talk a lot about workflow, and one of the reasons for that is that you already have security roles in your organization. You already have kind of permissions. They may be explicit or implicit. The more implicit they are, the more kind of scary the situation is. So making them explicit and kind of building an understanding about what these procedures and workflows are is important. And it also enables you to bring that into your whole agile planning and improvement process. Because you're going to improve security the same way and prioritize along with everything else that you work on.
So one of the things and a big part of DevOps is just enabling the creative process, right? Development is a creative process, and what you don't want to do is get in the way of that too much. So, but that can then be at odds with what we're calling good security hygiene, because a free and unfettered environment is maybe not as secure as it needs to be. But the point is that you don't need as much security in development as you do in some of the higher environments. So enabling collaboration, this is all good. Anybody can contribute scripts and things to your automation, but that's automation for the dev environment. So let's be clear about the boundaries that we're talking about here. That's not the puppet that's managing the infrastructure for production. So enabling collaboration, enabling all these things, that's kind of obvious. When we start, do you want to comment on the development environment?
This is where it is interesting.
Yeah, so I like this. I use this diagram a lot. A lot of people use the Toyota, manufacturing model as kind of the reference model for lean everything, right? So, can't hear me? No.
You really have to put it very close to your.
Yeah, hold it way up here.
How's that?
Keep the
Is that
mic.
better? Any better? Much better? Even better? Okay, cool. So manufacturing, right? The metaphor here is here's your Jenkins servers and here's your application, right? And in some ways, here's your security perimeter around it. And this works maybe for the development environment, and that's kind of our point. But it doesn't work for your infrastructure, because in your infrastructure, you have free range robots that are going all over the factory floor and in fact building your factory, right? So that's kind of the line that we're drawing here, that you don't necessarily need really lockdown security in a development environment, but as you go to these higher environments, you need to step that up. So this is where we're making the difference, that your Jenkins server should not have access to your production environment, for example.
This is where a lot of the interesting problems are, because people understand that developments doesn't have to be that protected, it's really a learning space. That production's obviously important, things need to be well controlled. CI is like the whole zone in between there, and it doesn't always feel clear where the boundary is, or how secure does CI have to be. And so we'll step through in a minute kind of a workflow of everything from code getting pushed by a developer to it showing up in production. And if you look at it from a security standpoint, some of those steps are a lot more of a threat from sort of a threat modeling standpoint than others. And if you have an organization where you kind of have everybody in the same role and everybody's got permission to do stuff because that's what helps you go fast, it's fast until things start going wrong, and it's not fast at all. So,
does anybody here share SSH keys? Anybody want to?
You don't need to.
We got a few, okay. So production is where it's the real target. It's where the real value is as far as any sort of threat that security is blocking. So this is where you really need to start separating the duties. The free collaborative environment that's in development really is inappropriate in production. How many people have experience with Puppet? Any? So you may know that the manifests are not. There's no boundaries within the Puppet master as far as the manifests go. So any node can pull manifests for any other node or any configuration environment. So that's something that we're helping folks with in terms of being able to define appropriate access to these resources that really have no security parameters built into them. What else are we talking about here? Best practice, no standing access to production. Now, this is pretty, does anybody here work in an environment where developers have access to production? Yeah, so there's so sometimes that's for expediency's sake. Sometimes it's for, it's the fastest way to get something fixed if something goes wrong. But it's really at odds with good, as we say, good security hygiene. Want to say anything about the?
I think we'll get into it when we get onto the workflow. But what we kind of walk through here is Conjur's like our own internal like continuous integration pipeline and what that workflow looks like. And so this table is like kind of the real like meat and potatoes of what we're talking about in terms of like the security controls. And some steps everybody kind of does the same, like submitting code, pull requests, getting that merged. Triggering a Jenkins job. Jenkins has permission to pull from the source control. Then you start to see a lot more deviation. Like some people give their CI server like a lot of power to write back into source control, power to actually put things into production. At Conjur we have like a lot more kind of nuanced flow there, and so it starts with Jenkins pulling the code in response to like a post-receive hook, building a package which doesn't require that much privilege. It's basically just compiling the code and putting it into the package. Then we have a pretty hard boundary between building a package and publishing it, because that's really the step where you're taking something that's kind of internal and harmless and turning it into something external, where if there was actually, for example, when we build like a labeled version, like an official version, we want to be sure that that it's tamper-proof, that it's not going to get modified in the future. And so an environment where everybody has access to Jenkins and Jenkins has push access for artifacts, like you can't make that guarantee anymore. And so to get back to the original tenets about like safe by default and easy to audit, like by not having the right roles there, you make things like harder than they need to be. And the fact is that everybody in the organization like doesn't need to be able to make that decision about promotion of an artifact from built to released version. It's just not something that everybody needs to do. And in fact, you could easily be giving people the power to do that don't even understand like the implications of what they're doing. So, so scope that one down. On the other hand, once the artifact is published, anybody in the organization should be able to pull it. That's literally everybody. You all work for the company, you can pull any version, it's easy. Not to say that anybody in the world can, but everybody in the company, right?
So one of the, is this just not working? Hello?
It works good if you just hold it right up.
Just hold it right up here, okay.
Yeah.
So one of the points we're making here, and you hear a lot of this, is do change review boards even make sense in the DevOps world? The point is, deployment is a conscious decision. And it may be automated, it may be an automated conscious decision, but you have a gate, you have a criteria that says this is ready. So the difference between continuous delivery and continuous deployment is continuous delivery, you have the potential to deploy, but not everybody's going to be Facebook where the developers are pushing code on day one. And a lot of people still, like us, ship software as opposed to run a SaaS solution. So there is this control point that the product has to go through where the making of the sausage is hidden from the consumers of the sausage. Pardon the metaphor.
Okay.
It's really good sausage.
We'll send the slides out, more details on the roles. But another thing worth noting here is that in the roles you have a mixture of like human actors and sort of robotic actors, and that's a big part of what we do as a company, but we certainly employ that internally. So having like role separation doesn't mean that all of a sudden everything got really slow and manual. It doesn't mean
And so in the best possible scenario, you're secure and you're really fast. It's not an inhibitor, it's simply a control, and it allows you to not be audited and prevents bad things from happening.
Nothing slows things down more than confusion, so
Yeah.
putting order like speeds things up for sure.
So who here keeps their secrets under version management? Anybody? Does anybody think that's a bad idea? So one of the things that we're big on is getting secrets off of developer machines, getting secrets into a controlled environment that is audited and access controlled. And so so this is a big part of what we do for a living is a part of the solutions that we deliver. Secrets management has become a thing. People didn't know what it meant 2 years ago, but now people recognize that these automated processes are privileged users in their own right, and they need to be treated as such. They need to be given identities. Their access needs to be controlled. If your Jenkins server is fetching the database password, you should probably have a record of that, because that password can be compromised, and at least you want to know who had it last, right? So there's a lot of best practices that go with just basic secrets management, some of which are listed here. So, and you can feel, I guess, maybe flattered that developers are getting more and more targeted because because sometimes there's a path of least resistance into these more valuable environments or access to these credentials are given. So some of the rules that we're advocating here is no secrets are statically deployed to any machine. Do not persist your secrets outside of their protected storage. They are ephemeral. They should be treated as ephemeral. You want to rotate them frequently so that even if they are compromised, their value is very limited. And you don't want to do things like sharing SSH keys.
Being in our position, we have people come to us for all kinds of reasons, and people know that there's a lot of power in these tools like the Puppet Master and those configuration management servers and Jenkins servers, and so the fact is that people who want to compromise your company seek out those targets, and they can find them through developers. That you are the channel to that system.
So our third principle, so we talked about separation of responsibilities or managing your environments appropriately, not unnecessarily burdening developers with security, for example. Talked about mapping your workflows and your roles. From that mapping, then, you can start defining what your policies are. And in many ways, you might already have your policies defined in terms of your automation templates. And so if you have any kind of privileges as part of your configuration, or some places lock down USB ports as part of their machine configurations for physical devices, that's part of your security policy. And that stuff should be kept track of, because as those security policies change, as they evolve, you want to keep track of that, and not just what evolved, but why it evolved. So you can show the evolution of your security protocols or your security policies by keeping them in basic version management.
Yeah, this is like a whole other talk, really. But there's so much value in having. I talked earlier about managing security the way you manage everything else in your organization through iterations and sprint and all that kind of stuff. And so by including security policies as much as possible as code, as data, as declarative files, within that process you then get to leverage everything else that you're doing about change control and management and prioritization and improving your own internal processes and workflows and all that kind of stuff. As well as versioning. Everybody's coming from a place, and sometimes it's just too hard to actually change one system into another. What you really need to do is run the old system alongside of the new system in parallel until you can get everything moved over, and then shut the old one down. So you literally need like versions of your security and versions of your workflow. We do that internally too.
So here's some lessons learned that Kevin's in a much better place to speak to than I am.
We'll keep this pretty short, but we talked about keeping the CI dev and prod systems like separate. Prod is prod the way it always has been, only more so. Dev is a sandbox. CI is where all the interesting problems are, because it's in between. If you don't share SSH keys, that means that any time you SSH to a machine, it's just SSH name of the machine. It's super easy. So granted, it takes like some tooling to make that all work, but it's actually, when we talk about a good user experience for developers, like what could be better than never having to figure out which SSH key like goes to which machine, because it's always just your key. That's good. And keeping secrets out of, I mean, source control and Jenkins are the two biggest kind of offenders. So it's always good to get that in from the beginning. But Jenkins is also a fairly clean upable system, I would say. You can make new jobs to do the right thing and slowly retire things.
So we were laughing when we were developing this. The things we got right was not nearly as long.
Not very long.
The things we got wrong, which is that's where you learn, right? So just being straight up.
And the ones that we are still working on today really have to do with that process improvement and iteration. Sitting down in our weekly retrospective and talking about which things are not working well. We don't normally talk that much about which parts are going awesome. So change management with new credentials, new applications, new processes, continuing to work on that. The CI system and negotiating those boundaries between development and production. And continuing to work on implementing secrets management practices that are more advanced, like automatic rotation.
So you notice we haven't said anything about code scanning. A lot of the shift left conversation in
That's why Vericode's here.
in security is about code scanning and development, and that's great and that's fine. But it doesn't address the process. And so what we're trying to do here, talking about security as user experience, is how do you add security to the process without impeding the process? That's really the dilemma and the challenge, but also the goal. So in summary, the principles that we outlined is security by default, make the policies easy to understand, deliver workflows, not tools, kind of in line with the Agile Manifesto. Make it transparent and even invisible. Make security invisible to the user, and then it just happens as a side effect of the work. Do what's needed to satisfy the audit compliant teams with minimal overhead. And then the recommendations being to keep the security concerns of the different environments in mind and separate, and because they are separate. Map your workflows and your roles, and from that you can derive your policies and document those and manage those as code in your version management system. So that's the content that we developed. We've got a couple of places you can go for more information on the blog. We are hiring as well, so check out our careers page. It's a cool space that we're in. Not a lot of people are talking about machine identity and managing the identity of non-human actors, but that day is coming rapidly, and we're kind of on the forefront of it. So. Any questions or comments before we step off the stage?
We're going to do a panel afterwards.
Okay, I guess we're doing a panel, so we'll save your questions.
All right, thank you very much, guys.